The Dwarves, written by Marcus Heitz and narrated by faeryprincesslolly.
Chapter 1, Part 3. Enchanted Realm of Ionandar. Girdlegard. Spring, 6234th solar cycle. Jolison sped through the underground vaults, followed by the panting Tungdil on his considerably shorter legs. They hurried down a gallery past oak-paneled doors leading to classrooms where young apprentices were taking lessons from more senior faemuli. Only 4 students were taught by Lot Ionan himself, one of whom would be chosen to inherit his academy, his underground vaults, and his realm. On reaching the laboratory, Jolison stopped abruptly and flung open the door. Small clouds of white smoke wafted toward them, creating an artificial fog. "Get a move on," he barked at Tungdil, who was racing to catch up. Breathing heavily, the dwarf stepped into the chamber and was instantly wreathed in mist. "Watch your manners, Jolison, or you'll be fixing the problem yourself." "Climb up the flue," the Famulus ordered tersely, propelling Tungdil across the room. "Something's blocking the chimney." Suddenly, the fireplace appeared out of nowhere, and beside it a bucket, which seemed to contain the source of the smoke. "I thought you were one of Lot Ionan's best apprentices. Wouldn't a bit of magic do the trick?" "I'm asking you to fix it," the Famulus said firmly. "What would a dwarf know of sorcery? You're wasting everyone's time. My pupils can't see a thing in here." There was some low coughing and clearing of throats. "What's the magic word?" "Pardon?" "I should have thought a wizard would have a bit more charm." Jolison scowled. "Please." Tungdil grinned, picked up the poker, and hooked it through his belt. As if by magic, he stepped into the fireplace, where the embers had faded to a weak red glow. A quick upward glance confirmed that a thick layer of opaque smoke had sealed the chimney like a screen. Climbing confidently, he set about scaling the flue. The soot was slippery, but his fingers found easy purchase on the uneven brickwork, and he hauled himself up, rising slowly but steadily, 1, 2, 3 paces until the hearth disappeared beneath him amid the smoke. He reached up and nudged something with his fingers. "I think there's a nest up here. It must have fallen into the chimney," he called down. "Then get rid of it." "I was hardly going to lay an egg in it." He braced himself against the wall of the chimney, took hold of the offending twigs with one hand, and gave them a vigorous shake. The nest came free. At that moment he received an unpleasant surprise. A torrent shot toward him, drenching him in a foul-smelling liquid that stung his eyes and skin, followed soon after by a cloud of delicate feathers that tickled his face and his nose. Overcome with the urge to sneeze, he let go of the brickwork and fell. Tungdil had the good fortune to not graze himself on any of the jutting bricks, sustaining nothing more serious than a few nasty knocks to the chest and landing in the remains of the nest, whose twigs had ignited among the embers. Clouds of ash fell around him and coated him in a fine gray soot. He sprang up, fearful of burning his bottom, but the hot embers had already scorched through his breeches. The raucous laughter left him no doubt that he was the victim of a malicious joke. At once the clouds cleared miraculously, so the class of 20 young famuli could observe the humiliated and disheveled dwarf. Jolison was leading the general merriment and slapping his thighs in glee. "Help! The stunted soot man is here to get us!" he cried in mock horror. "He stole the elixir from the skunk bird's nest," one of his pupils jeered. "You never know. It might be his natural smell," said Jolison, dissolving into laughter all over again. He turned to Tungdil. "All right, midget, I've had my fun. You can go." The dwarf wiped his face on his sleeve. His head was crowned with ash and feathers, but now it shrank menacingly into his shoulders, and his eyes flashed with rage. "You think this is funny, do you?" he growled grimly. "Let's see if you laugh at this." He made a grab for the bucket, which felt cool to the touch, giving him all the encouragement he needed to hurl its contents. He raised his arm and took aim at the famulus, who had turned his back and was joking with his pupils. A warning shout alerted Jolison to the threat. Whirling around, the quick-thinking famulus saw the contents of the bucket flying toward him and raised his hands to ward off the water with a spell. In a flash, the droplets turned to shards of ice and flew past him without drenching his freshly changed robes. The tactic worked, but at a price, as the assembled famuli realized from the sound of tinkling glass. The hailstorm had passed over their heads, only to land among the neat rows of phials whose contents, elixirs, balms, extracts, and other essences, were used in all manner of spells. The containers shattered. Already the potions were seeping from the broken phials and mingling in pools on the shelves. The mixtures crackled and hissed ominously. "You fool!" scolded Jolison, pale with fear. The dwarf bridled. "Don't look at me," he retorted indignantly. "You're the one who turned the water into ice." Just then a shelf collapsed and a flurry of sparks shot to the ceiling, exploding in a flash of red light. Something was brewing in the laboratory, this time quite literally. Some of the pupils decided that enough was enough and ran for the door. Jolison darted after them. "This is all your fault. Lot Ionand will be sorry he ever took you in. You won't be here for much longer, dwarf, not if I can help it," he shouted furiously, slamming the door as he left. "If you don't let me out of here this instant, I'll strap you to my anvil and beat you with a red-hot hammer," threatened Tungdil, as he rattled the handle in vain. He suspected that Jolison had placed a spell on the door and locked him inside to take the blame. "You won't get away with this." The dwarf ducked as something exploded behind him. Looking up, he scanned the room hurriedly for somewhere to shelter until he was released. Chapter 1, Part 4. Beroïn's Folk. Secondling Kingdom, Girdlegard, Winter, 6233rd Solar Cycle. Belengulin watched in concern as the last of the delegates filed out of the hall. The meeting of the assembly had taken an unexpected and unwelcome turn. It was a serious setback for the High King's hopes of uniting the peoples of Girdlegard in a grand alliance against the perished land. "Please, Vrockus, make that obdurate fourthling see sense," he prayed fretfully. Once the hall had emptied, Gundrabur extended his hand shakily and reached for Belengulin's arm. "Our planning will come to nothing," he said dully. "The young king of Goimdil's folk lacks experience." With a weak smile he squeezed his counselor's fingers. "Or maybe he needs a wise adviser, my loyal friend." He struggled upright and reached for his gleaming crown. His right hand, which moments earlier had wielded a heavy hammer, trembled as he lifted the finely wrought metal from his head. "A war," he muttered despondently. "A war against the elves. What can Girdlegard be thinking?" "Precisely nothing," his counselor replied bitterly. "That's the problem. There's no point in reasoning with Girdlegard or his adviser. I don't believe in their mysterious parchment for one moment. It's a forgery, I'm sure, written with the intention of winning support for a war that it served its purpose," the High King reminded him. "The damage has been done. You know how headstrong the chieftains can be. Some of them are itching to go to war with the elves, regardless of whether the document was faked." "True, your majesty, but some of the fourthlings seemed rather more reticent. Girdlegard's victory is by no means assured. The matter will be decided by a vote, with each chieftain following his conscience. We must convince the clans of both folks of the merit of our argument." The two dwarves fell silent. A more lasting solution was needed to prevent Girdlegard from reviving his plans for war at a later date. Once he was crowned High King, he would be able to implement his scheme with little or no resistance. Neither Gundraber nor Belengulin was worried about the military might of the elves. The dwarves' traditional enemy was considerably weakened, having suffered serious losses in the ongoing battle against the Alfar, who profited from the reinforcements streaming into Girdlegard via the northern pass. In the event of a war, the elven army would be easily defeated, but casualties would be inflicted on both sides, and any loss of life among the children of the smith would leave the gates of Girdlegard vulnerable to attack. Gundraber's gaze roved across the deserted chamber. The great hall has seen happier times, times of unity and cohesion. He bowed his head. Those times are over. Our hopes of forging a great alliance have come to nothing. A great alliance. Deep in thought, Belengulin stared at the 5 stellae at the foot of the throne. The stone slabs were engraved with the sacred laws of the dwarves, including the name of a folk with whom the others would have no truck. Lorenber's dwarves in the Thirdling kingdom to the east. For the sake of an alliance, I would do the unthinkable and invite the Thirdlings to join our assembly. The High King sighed. In times such as these, old animosities must be forgotten. We're all dwarves, after all, and kinship is what counts. The councillor was in no doubt that Girdlegard needed every axe that could cleave an orcish skull, but he also knew his fellow dwarves too well. After Gandagar's rabble-rousing, the assembly will be in no mood for appeasement. Perhaps you're right, Belengulin. I know our vision of a united and unstoppable dwarven army is fading, but we cannot permit the assembly to sanction a war against the elves. We must convince the delegates that attacking Ionandar would be foolhardy. The king's voice sounded weaker than ever. We need more time. The timing depends on you, his counselor said gently. Gandagar will not ascend the throne while you are strong enough to rule. No one should rely on the failing fires of a dying king. Gundrabar smoothed his beard. We need something more decisive. We shall use the dwarven laws to silence the warmongers and put a stop to the matter once and for all. He descended the throne, negotiating the steps with utmost concentration. Every movement was small and considered, but at last he reached the stellae. Belengulin was at his side in an instant to offer him a steadying arm. Golden sunlight poured through the slits carved into the rock, illuminating every flourish of the runes. Gundraber's weak eyes scanned the symbols. Gandagar is certain to be elected, he muttered absently, but if my memory serves me correctly, there is a way of delaying the succession. It will buy us some time so we can talk to the chieftains and strive for peace and an alliance with the elves. His eyesight had dimmed with the cycles, and was now so poor that he was forced to stand with his nose almost touching the stone. The law stated that the throne, currently occupied by a dwarf of Beroïn, should pass to one of Goimdil's folk. On that basis, Gandagar's succession was secure. Tradition dictated that the heir should stake his claim and be elected by the assembly unless there was a reason to contest the appointment. I'm sure it's here somewhere, he muttered to himself, fingertips gliding across the stone. His efforts were rewarded. With a sigh of relief, he closed his eyes and pressed his brow against the cold tablet whose surface had been engraved long before he was born. After such a wretched beginning, the orbit has taken a turn for the better. Listen to this. He straightened up and ran a crooked index finger over the all-important words. Should the folk in question produce more than one possible heir, the clans of that folk must confer among themselves and decide on a candidate before presenting their preferred successor to the assembly, he finished in a satisfied tone. His counselor read the passage again. fiddling excitedly with the trinkets in his graying beard. There was nothing to say that the chosen candidate would be the existing monarch. Any dwarf could stake a claim. Accordingly, a dwarf of any rank may be elected High King, provided he has the support of his kinsfolk. Belengulin saw what his sovereign had in mind. "But who would challenge Girdlegard?" he asked. "The Fourthling clans are in agreement. To be sure, there are those who doubt their king, but—" He stopped, baffled by the look of satisfaction on the High King's craggy face. Or is there such a dwarf? "No," Gundrabar answered with a wily smile, thinking of the letter that had been sent to him several orbits ago. "Not yet, but there will be."
Hello friends, this is Gunther Hammerhands. Thank you for checking out Fairy Princess Lolly's channel. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like and subscribe button. And if you'd like to support these magical creations, fly over to our Patreon and join the fairy family. Safe travels!